Hi, this is Marti Noxon. I am co-executive producer of the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I wrote this episode, which is called What's My Line, Part 1. I actually co-wrote it with Howard Gordon, who was on the show for just about half a season, actually. He asked me to work on this with him, which was a wonderful opportunity for me. I think this was my very first year working on the show, and maybe one of the very first episodes I got to write. So it's great to go back and visit it again.
No, it's just these people can't tell from one multiple choice test what we're going to be doing for the rest of our lives. It's ridiculous.
I'm kind of curious to find out what sort of career I could have.
Let's see what's going on here. This is a set we have here in Buffyland. We do not film at one of the studios. We actually film in a bunch of warehouses and a little office building where we have the writers in Santa Monica, but it's not actually a studio. So we have this whole little village, which is sort of Buffy Village, and not nearly as glamorous as you probably think it is. Warehouses, not glamorous. But part of the fun of that, though, is that we have our offices right next door to the sound stages, and we can walk down to the sound stages from the writers' rooms pretty much any time we want to. And all of Sunnydale High used to exist downstairs. It doesn't anymore. It's been replaced by Sunnydale U.
I shouldn't even be bothering with this. It's all Mootville for me. No matter what my aptitude test says, we already know my deal.
Yep, high risk, sub-minimum wage.
Pointy wooden things.
And why are you even taking
This was one of the sets that we did a lot of shooting in because it was a common area. And as you may notice, our characters tend to sit around and talk about school, but they don't ever seem to actually go to school. So this is one of the places where they have snacks related to going to school and conversation.
You know, with that kind of attitude, you could have had a bright future as an employee at the DMV.
I'm sorry, it's just... Unless hell freezes over and every vamp in Sunnydale puts in for early retirement, I'd say my future is pretty much a non-issue.
Here we are with Drusilla and Spike. One of the fun things about their characters is that we introduced them thinking that they would sort of be season-long villains, and as you well know if you're a fan of the show, Spike is now a regular, and Drusilla will pop in and out from time to time, but they were sort of larger than life and became very popular and really stayed longer on the series than we ever imagined they would.
Give us some peace, would you? Can't you see I'm working?
I'm sorry, kitten.
It's just this manuscript.
Spike now, of course, is almost part of the Scooby Gang. He's got a chip in his head, but that's a whole other story. In this particular episode, Drusilla is ailing. She's got kind of a mystical disease for which I can't quite remember what the cause is. I don't even know if there is a specific cause, but she's ill and they're desperately searching for a cure. And really, we just did this to give Spike some major motivation, to give him a reason for wanting to be motivated through the episode. And we figured they have this very strong relationship, even though they're creepy vampire types. They have a very genuine affection between the two of them. And so Drusilla being ill would be a real strong motivation for him. So this is one of those things in the writing business that we sort of would call a MacGuffin. You know, it seems like it's important, but it's really just a reason to get characters moving and going along. And again, this is another set in Buffyland. Back there is Dalton the vampire, who I think he appears in another episode or two later on. Again, that was just good luck for him because, you know, sometimes characters who come on and we never think we're going to use them again, we realize either they just sparked for some reason, they were interesting actors, or they just become very useful. Another case like that is Anya, a character who appears in another episode, but we never thought she was going to be a season regular, and she was just such an interesting character that we brought her back again and again. So Dalton appeared, I think, a couple more times.
He can't help you. Not without a key.
The key?
One of the cool things about this is one of my first experiences writing for television, and these tarot cards are completely made up, you know. There are images on them that don't exist on real tarot cards, and it was one of the first times I ever sort of had a Harold and the Purple Crayon experience, which is writing something, and then 2 days later the amazing people who work on our show just have them created them. So they came up one day with the tarot cards to show us and say, is this sort of what you had in mind? And that's an amazing feeling when you write something and you imagine it, and a couple days later it exists. And as you can imagine, that happens all the time on Buffy because we're always making stuff up. Here are the credits, and basically what I think about when I see these is just sort of like, wow, look at their hair. The many hairstyles of Buffy. And of course it's sort of a memory lane, like, look at that long hair, look at how cute she looked. And then of course there's Angel, and we go cry, 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 except for the fact that he's on at 9 o'clock now, so don't cry, be happy. This is actually, again, not graveyard. This is our set outside. Here in Buffyland, we have some patches of grass interspersed between the trailers and the parking area outside, which we dress with all kinds of different things. These headstones are actually made out of styrofoam, as is that crypt. And, we pretty much cart them out for graveyard scenes. And we have some other things that look like grass that we sort of roll out into the middle of the parking lot to sort of make it look more like a real graveyard. It's probably, I don't know, it's tiny. It's not even the size of half a city block. It's a tiny, tiny set that we just shoot over and over and over again from 9,000 different angles, trying desperately to make it look different. That's always a real challenge. I think, again, if you're a regular watcher of the show, you might get hip to the fact that she's basically walking by the same crypt every week. Or we redress the crypt, with different names, different kinds of accoutrement to make it look different, but basically same place, same crypt, same outdoor patch of grass. And then we can also redress this for a park. We have swing sets and park benches. Lately, you'll be seeing a lot of it as you see Sunnydale, this little patch of grass. But if you look behind you, you'll always see the same telephone poles and the same wall, and it's just the same place. So that's kind of fun to look for if you know about it.
One down, one gone.
David Solomon directed this episode. He actually started on Buffy as a head of post-production, and he'd had some experience directing before, but I think that this was really his breakthrough series, and now he is no longer the head of post-production. He is actually only directing, which is really cool. This was a fun scene because we kind of got a chance to poke fun at Angel, which at that point he was still really the broody, sexy guy, and we didn't really make a ton of fun of him, but we started to have some fun with him at this point, sort of having her come in and surprise him instead of the other way around. Now, one of the things about this scene is that I think we went a long way to sort of preserve a joke, because in fact Buffy comes in the window and her mom is out of town, and we forgot that, but we had set up this whole joke where she comes in and surprises Angel when she gets to sort of say, oh, now you know what it feels like to be snuck up on. And we didn't want to lose the joke, but her mom wasn't even home, so we sort of had him say, how come you're coming in the window? And she's like, oh, I forgot. And that's all. We went a really far way just to preserve a joke, which in the long run may not have been worth it. But that's the kind of thing you do when you're a writer. You fall in love with one little thing, and you'll move heaven and earth to preserve it. So I always think about that during this scene, because it was actually, I think, on set when we went, how come she's coming in the window? And that stuff happens a lot, too, where at the last minute we'll be looking at a scene and we'll realize that we did something completely numbskully.
I don't get to play. Sometimes I just want...
You want what? It's okay.
There's a motif that we've used again and again, which is Angel doesn't appear in mirrors. In this case, it was sort of to show Buffy's isolation and aloneness. And that's an old saw we used quite a bit to, usually for dramatic purposes, to sort of show, with their relationship, to sort of show that as much as they love each other, there's this fundamental difference between the two of them. I mean, she may be a super chick, but he's dead, basically, or, undead, or whatever the technical term is for it, but they are very different, and in some ways they'll never be able to be truly together.
Was this part of your normal life?
The ice skating stuff was kind of fun because, in fact, it was inspired by Sarah herself, who I guess has done quite a bit of ice skating and took lessons. And I don't know how serious she was about it, but I know that there were costumes involved. That's all I can say. That at one point she actually was very heavily into ice skating. So we knew that about her, and she had said a couple times that I think on actors' resumes they have like special skills, and it can be like, oh, I can speak dialects. Oftentimes it's like I chew gum and walk at the same time, but in Sarah's case there are actual skills on there, and one of them was ice skating. So we had sort of been looking for a way to show that, because it would just be an interesting color for her, something that you didn't expect or hadn't seen before. So as you'll see later in this episode, we got to use that, which is really fun. Here are Cordelia and Xander, who I really was lucky because I had the opportunity to sort of write their budding relationship, and it's a very love-hate kind of thing, and it was a whole lot of fun. I mean, they had a lot of fun with that direction. They didn't see it coming with the characters, and I don't think the audience really did either, or maybe I'm completely deluded. Maybe you guys all knew exactly what was going to happen, but it was a lot of fun to write them. They were enthusiastic about the whole process, particularly Nikki in the kissage, but that's to be expected. This is actually Torrance, California. This is a real high school, and those are not real high school students behind them. One of the things that always amused me about going down there was to see the Hollywood version of high school students and then the actual reality of high school students, because if you were Martian and you were only watching television about high school, you would think that everybody in high school was 24 and really good looking. So you'd have all these sort of older people, extras, because these are the people who can actually afford to take the day off and be extras, or people who are out of school for the most part, and also we can't hire minors. So these are all people beyond 18, well beyond 18, walking by, trying to look young and cool. And then the behind the scenes, this is a real working high school, so there would be real high school kids standing around, and everything that real high school kids are, from beautiful to pimply awkwardness, and all looking younger than they had any right to be.
You didn't check to see which seminar I was assigned to, did you?
I did, and you weren't.
I wasn't what?
On the list.
But I handed in my test. I used a number 2 pencil.
Then I guess you must have passed.
It's not the kind of test you pass or fail.
Your name wasn't up there, Will.
This is one of our sets back here in Buffyland, the library. This particular set has proven to be, well, now it's proven to be blown up, which we're all pretty glad about. But before that, it was a real challenge to shoot. You'll see as things go on that we spent an awful lot of time in this set trying to make it seem spatially interesting and give it some variety. It was always a real challenge. And so trying to hide the fact that we're there tons of time. And most of the time when we're in there, people are just talking, not a lot's going on. So this sort of came to be known as sort of the death set. You just hope for the best and try to give it a little variety. As you can see here, we're doing wonderful things with stacked books, just to give it some spatial variation.
Now it's going to bug me all day.
One of the interesting things for me about working on the show is how to do exposition, because we do a ton of it. Contrary to popular belief, a lot of the stuff that we show on the show isn't actually real. We make it up. As a result, we have a lot of explaining to do, because it's not like you can say, well, she went to the doctor. You say, well, she went to the Troll of Maghrib, and we have to explain what that means and what the Troll of Maghrib does. And there's a lot of people talking about the Orb of Thessaly and the Cross of Wahutni, and trying to keep that interesting and lively has proven to be a real challenge. But I think we get away with it simply by pointing out a lot of times the sort of silliness of it and trying to have fun with it at the same time that we try to service the plot and keep moving as fast as we can.
Either way, I'm bored, constricted, I never get to shop, and my hair and fingernails still continue to grow. So, really, when you think about it, what's the diff?
Do we have to be introspective now? Our only concern is to discover what was stolen from that mausoleum last night.
This is it then.
Here we are back to the lovely Drusilla and Spike. Again, this is a set. This is Drusilla's bedroom, and there's some fun stuff here that you actually, I don't think, see in this episode. Like, Drusilla has a bunch of dolls that she likes to play with. James is actually, you can see them right behind him if you look real carefully. And the set dressers actually tied little black gags around all of the dolls' mouths, you know, just because they thought Drusilla would do stuff like that. So she has these poor little gagged and desperate-looking dollies in the background, and it's always fun when we build a new set to go down and see what they've done, because every person who works on our show is an amazing craftsperson, and they all have a real good time sort of taking the Buffy universe and making it more real to them. So there are a lot of little touches like that in this set as well as all the others.
I need to bring in the big guns. I'll take care of her once and for all.
Big guns?
The Order of Taraka.
The bounty hunters?
Oh, and here's those tarot cards I told you about. The villains in this particular piece are highly unusual. It was one of the things that was pretty fun for me just starting off, because my background is actually not so much the supernatural realm, although I wrote a lot of stuff like that. I tended to be more like straight suicide drama, death and mayhem kind of girl. When Joss said we were going to have a villain who was made entirely of bugs, I was pretty dubious. I didn't even understand what he was talking about, but he introduced me to a whole world of sort of comic books and fantasy, and this was the beginning of that, where I started to learn to speak the secret language of Joss. Villains, you know, who were made out of bugs and stuff like that. There's good old Principal Snyder. Didn't he get eaten by a snake? Yeah, he surely did, but he's still pretty snake-free at this point.
So inspired by your leadership, I'm thinking principal school. I want to walk in your shoes. Not your actual shoes, of course, because you're a tiny person. Not tiny in the small sense, of course.
I'm not going to name any names, but here's a little inside scoop. One of our writers has a vicious crush on him. Terrible, terrible. As to a number of us, really, it's true. We were really sad to see him go. He's just an amazing character, and we're hoping to find a way to maybe bring him back in dream sequences, because Principal Snyder is a favorite, sort of rounding out the cast character.
Whatever comes out of your mouth is a meaningless waste of breath. An airborne toxic event.
Well, I'm glad you feel comfortable enough to be so honest with me. And I can only hope that one day I'm in the position to be that honest with you.
Fascinating.
Well, love to stay and chat, but I got an appointment with the warden on standard riot procedure. Ciao.
Okay, see ya.
Willow Rosenberg, come with us, please.
Excuse me?
This little thing was fun. One of the things that was really fun to do in this episode was the whole career day theme, because at least for me, that whole choice at the end of high school was really daunting, and it felt like you had no idea what you wanted to be when you grew up. You basically, at least for me, I wasn't sure I wanted to grow up, but each one of these kids individually sort of thinking about what their fate might be, it seemed pretty clear that Willow would be the one who had pretty much the largest number of options. And at the time, the whole computer world and technological world, this was a few years ago, just seemed like the obvious thing that we would come after them. And this was a great way to sort of show that they were in a different class than the other students. Now, one of the fun things about this episode is that this is one of the first times that Oz and Willow, if not the first time, I think maybe the first time they ever talk. Certainly Oz has seen Willow before that. It was a great way to sort of show that they were characters who had a lot in common, even though they didn't know each other very well, and they didn't know that yet. Although obviously Oz proves to be a really different kind of student than Willow does. He basically is smart, but that's not really his thing. He'd much rather be playing the guitar and hanging out. Oh, and look, now you can really see what I was talking about. This is a parking lot, pretending to be a graveyard. It's a stunt parking lot, basically, and even that thing behind them with the pointy headstone type thing, that's just a rolling piece of plywood with fake grass on it, and we just roll it out there in the middle of the parking lot.
But remember, I'm the picked.
What you have is more than a gig. It's a sacred duty, which shouldn't prevent you from eventually procuring some more gainful form of employment, such as I did.
I have to drive through there every morning to get to work, and it's always fun when you drive in every morning to see whether it's a graveyard or a playground or what it is on Monday or Wednesday or Tuesday or Friday. It's going to be something different.
The point is, no one blinks an eye if you want to spend all your days with books. What am I supposed to do? Carve steaks for a nursery?
Point taken. I must admit, I've never really... Well, now there's a thought. Have you ever considered law enforcement?
Papa.
Even like that little pond totally lifts. You can see the reflection from the pond on the crypt there. And you see right there, just a little Hollywood magic for you. Now we're inside. That's a set inside one of our warehouses. This again was fun for me because it was one of the first times that I wrote a scene where there was kind of some mystical property or thing they were looking for. And it was the first time that I realized, for a good part of my early experience on Buffy, I would look things up and find names and go through books about the occult and mysticism and witchcraft, and I'd get real spells, and I'd look up the names of real saints and wizards and witches and all that kind of stuff. And I think it was probably this episode after my first couple when I realized I could just make this stuff up.
Josephus Dulac was buried here. He belonged to a religious sect that was excommunicated by the Vatican at the turn of the century.
Excommunicated and sent to Sunnydale. There's a guy big with his sinning.
Another fun thing about working on the show was sort of the ideal surrogate parent in Giles that Buffy has. We really don't see very much of Buffy's father. He's a character actor who lives in Los Angeles, basically, who we don't get to see a lot of, but she really has this incredible relationship with Giles. That's always been a real pleasure to write because the two of them as actors also have a pretty great chemistry.
So everything's cool then?
It's not. First the book was taken from the library, and now the vampires have stolen something from Dulac's tomb.
Do you think they figured out how to read the book?
Something's coming, Buffy, and whatever it is, I can guarantee it's not good.
Bus 219 continuing service to Los Angeles. Now arriving to Sunnydale.
This is another non-set. The house that the Worm Man is passing is actually a real house in Torrance, California that we picked for the Summers house. And until recently, we were able to shoot there. Unfortunately, we can't shoot the exterior of that house anymore because when we did the season finale where we blew up the high school, apparently they set the explosives to be a little too explosive, and they woke up pretty much all of Torrance at about 5 o'clock in the morning when they exploded the school and set off numerous car alarms, and many dogs are barking and jumping fences, and it was apparently quite the mayhem. So we're not welcome in Torrance anymore, from what I understand. So now you probably won't see a lot of the outside of Buffy's house, so get a good look if you want to back it up and look again, because you're not going to see much of it anymore. Who knows, sometimes things like that can be smoothed over, so we may again be able to visit. This was cool because this again is our parking lot. We couldn't afford to go to the airport, so here's one of those things, movie magic. We bought some stock shots of a plane taking off, and then they built this, I don't know if it's called a fuselage, but that sounds really cool, so I'm going to say it. We built this inside of an airplane-looking thing on the parking lot, near the graveyard, really. When Kendra comes out of the airplane, you may even notice that same patch of grass. So, and I always have to say, whenever I see this, I always think of that Janet Jackson video where she's singing on the wing of the airplane, because she just looks so Janet to me right there. That's Kendra making her first appearance. We just get a lot of mileage out of the parking lot area of Buffyland and of the library where we are again. I think that one of the things that is so commendable about Tony and his talents is the ability to make the most ridiculous stuff sound actually credible.
Dulac was both a theologian and a mathematician. This article describes an invention of his, which he called the Dulac cross.
I think that's one of the great things about getting someone all British and stuff, is it lends a certain air of authority to saying things like, the cross of Dulac is the, key to the blah, blah, blah. If it was just some guy saying it, but Tony actually brings a real sense of authority, because the poor guy, sometimes all he has to say in shows is stuff like this. And then every once in a while we know that, we have to give him an actual emotion to play, or he'll go do Shakespeare or something silly like that. He's a really good sport about it, too. He actually is wonderful. But again, this is another one of those scenes where you're trying to keep it interesting by having people crack some jokes while you basically spin a lot of yarn to serve the story.
Unless we can preempt their plans.
How?
By learning what's in the book before they do. Which means we can expect you to be here later tonight.
Goody. Research party.
Will, you need a life in the worst way.
Speaking of, I really have to bail, but
The whole idea here was sort of bounty hunters coming after Buffy, and we were just trying to keep the idea of bounty hunters a little more interesting by making the villains unusual and unexpected. But here's a moment in the show that I really appreciate. It's one of the things that really drew me to Buffy was the fact that even though she's a super chick and she's really cool and has these special powers, she's also a girl, and even in the middle of a crisis, she has other agendas, and one of them is the fact that she's got a love life and she's got this vampire guy she's mad about. And so even in the middle of a great crisis and we want you to feel the urgency, she's going to go ice skating. And, we were hoping that people wouldn't sort of go, hey, wait a minute. But in fact, it's one of the things that I find kind of charming about the show, which is the fact that even though there are a lot of elements of it that are sort of straight horror drama, in fact, it really is about a person with a lot of different qualities. And she doesn't always say the most logical thing. She does the thing that her heart tells her to. And that's one of the reasons why she's more interesting than, say, just Wonder Woman. She's sitting in her little invisible plane, Buffy sometimes makes real emotional choices, and like in the episode Angel, where she bares her neck to Angel before she really knows if he's a good guy or a bad guy, that was a key moment for me in sort of figuring out that the show wasn't going to be just a straight horror fantasy show, that it was going to have some real unexpected character-driven twists. As before, I mentioned, this is actually Sarah skating, that she's uncomfortable on ice. She's a smart person on ice, and she was doing all this herself. That, of course, is not Sarah. The people who get pounded into things are generally not Sarah. That's sort of a union rule. They don't like us to pound her into things. Actually, David has done a fair number of his own stunts. The guys are all pretty game. They like to do this kind of stuff, and we actually have to keep them from doing too much a lot of times because we don't want them to get hurt. Oh, here we go with the neck thing and the blade of her skate, because when I originally wrote this scene, I sort of envisioned it like Fargo. I saw blood everywhere on the ice. I imagined this white ice and the big red stain of his blood seeping out, and the high shot of just blood everywhere, ice, blood, and ice. And in the air version, which you see, I don't think there is any blood whatsoever, because of course this is television. You may see a hint of it here, but I learned my lesson. You should see the pages as they're originally written. It's just like, it's The Shining, and this is how it actually ends up being. Even so, this was a really fun scene to do because it was an unusual location, and in fact, all of the crew members got to put on ice skates, and when they were taking a break that day, they all got out there, and we have some really nice footage in one of our gag reels of the whole crew.
This is bad, Buffy. We gotta get you out of here.
What, you mean hide?
Let's just get you someplace safe.
No, your eye. Hey, don't be a baby. I'm not gonna hurt you.
It's not that.
What?
You shouldn't have to touch me when I'm like this.
This is a real key scene in that this was a scene where I think Buffy, for the first time, I think maybe the only time, kisses Angel, or the only time we ever see her kiss Angel when he's a vampire. And it was a real important scene because we wanted to show that she was really beginning to accept him and really acknowledge who he was and not be afraid of him anymore. Of course, as I was watching this scene, I was only really thinking, ow, isn't she going to cut her mouth on those fangs? And it's really dangerous. It's hard not to wonder, but they pulled it off, look, with some enthusiasm. And there's Kendra, who's seeing this, and obviously the other point of the scene was to show Buffy in the most compromising situation possible, and we knew that Kendra wouldn't know he was a vampire unless he was vampire face. And so that was actually an instance where something that was good for the characters came out of necessity. I think, as I recall, we realized that we wanted Kendra to see her kissing Angel in vamp face before we realized that that was actually going to be a really nice character moment and that we could play that. It was really just something we were doing to have Kendra realize what was going on, to think that Buffy was on the wrong side of the fight, when in fact she's not. Hard to explain to Kendra about the whole Angel situation, which becomes a very strong dynamic between Buffy and Kendra in this episode, which is Kendra is a character who comes from a really different world, and she doesn't understand how Buffy can have a life and how she can have a boyfriend, and particularly how she can have a vampire boyfriend. I saw all of that kind of nicely, succinctly dramatized in that image, which, by the way, was Joss Whedon's, not mine, so I can flatter him. And gosh, here we are in the library again. As I recall, they're figuring out here, the reason that Kendra is able to exist is that in a season 1 episode, I think it was the season 1 episode finale, I wasn't working on the show at that point, so I don't really pay attention to what happened that first season, but I hear that Buffy drowned, and she died for a very small moment. She died for something like 2 or 3 minutes, and that, according to the Slayer lore of Joss Whedon, is enough time for the new Slayer to be called. I don't know if that was something that he had already thought about, that the fact there'd be another Slayer after Buffy died and then was revived, but he certainly figured it out later and realized that there would be another Slayer around. Here's the Bugman, and that was all in the imagination of who we call our fearful leader. It was pretty cool, too, because I actually got to go to bug auditions for that sequence. When you write anything with animals, you don't get like just regular animals. You get Hollywood stunt animals, and they even have stunt worms. That I just have to comment on that shot where the guy pulls the comb out. We were trying to show like paranoia, like is there an assassin after her? And that guy pulling his comb out just really worked for me. It's just like the most unnatural. Like, who is this guy and why is he pulling his comb out like that in the middle of the hall in Sunnydale? Sometimes our ambitions exceed our grasp. Maybe that was one of those moments. Again, there's another nice little moment where we sort of are introducing Seth Green, who played Oz, and we sort of played around with him quite a bit in the first episodes of this season. I think this was episode 11, and it was neat to sort of, raise people's expectations about who this guy was and show him as being kind of cool and interesting before we had him and Willow actually really get to know each other. But yeah, back to the Bugman. I got to go to bug auditions, and they have a bug wrangler, a special person who showed us all kinds of different bugs. We had the animal people there making sure that we didn't harm any of the worms. We had to have that special person there, and we did not harm any of the worms, I promise you.
I wish there was more we could do.
We're doing all that we can. The only course of action is to try and find out what was in that stolen book.
I've never seen Buffy like that. She just took off.
Well, she didn't go home. I let the phone ring a few hundred times before I remembered her mom is out of town.
Well, maybe Buffy unplugged the phone.
No, it's a statistical impossibility for a 16-year-old girl to unplug her phone.
I guess at this point, they don't know where Buffy is because she's running scared from the assassins. And again, this is one of those places where logic might tell you she would go to her friends. But again, Buffy isn't necessarily always going to do the most logical thing. She's a teenage girl. And if I were her, I would go look for my hunky boyfriend, which is what she's doing. She's going to Angel's apartment. Again, this is a set. And I think this is also part of the set. We built those stairs down, and she started on a platform and walked down the fake stairs to the basement, to the fake basement. Angel's set is really fun because obviously he's been alive for a good long time, 240-something years. So we imagine that he would have stuff from all of his travels and all of the various places he'd been. I remember seeing his place and thinking, damn, when you're alive for 240 years, you get really aesthetic. But he has beautiful art objects, and it's all very classé. But it was a fun set to walk around and look at, because a lot of those pictures are from different eras. In the background you can see they're from the 1800s and the turn of the century. And here, we see Buffy looking for him. He, I believe, is out trying to protect her. But she doesn't know this, though, so she feels much more alone than she ever has. She's feeling pretty low. And I think Mom was conveniently out of town for just this reason. We wanted to give Buffy an even greater sense of isolation, so we put her mom on a weekend getaway or something. And this was one of those moments that we just wanted to show her vulnerability, and the little curling up on the bed was part of that. Here's Willie the Snitch. This was fun. This was a character that I actually got to come up with. I think he may be one of the only ones I actually did conceive. The thought behind Willie was basically that in a town of demons and lowlifes, there would probably be some lowlife human beings who were kind of like making their living off the underworld, and that Willie sort of traffics in blood and all kinds of I don't know what demons eat for snacks, pig snouts or whatever, but that he serves the demon world and that he profits from it when he can. But he's basically a weasel. And at one point, we'd actually thought of making him an actual weasel, like he could turn into a weasel, because we thought that was pretty funny. But in fact, it's not that funny, and we decided not to do it. That Willie's just a skeevy little guy. But again, this is Carrie Meyer is our set designer, and he created this set, which is a divey type of bar. Later on in the series, Willie gets himself a neon sign that says Willie's Place, which he was doing that to kind of class the joint up. But at this point, he doesn't have that sign. I only bring that up because I have that sign in my office now. I pretty much wrote it hoping that they would put it in my office when they were done with it. The power of the magic crayon, because I just thought that was cool. And really, this bar is another great example of Carrie's artistry. I mean, it really feels real to me, and it has a real LA feel to it. I mean, even though it's Sunnydale, it has a kind of noir-y kind of feel.
Where can I find it?
Oh, I tell you that. I'm gonna need relocating expenses. It'll cost you.
It'll cost who?
Oh, okay. He and that freaky chick of his are... Oh.
And here's the arrival of Kendra, who obviously doesn't know that Angel's a good vampire. How would she know that? Actually, her stunt woman was pretty great. I can't tell the difference between the two of them. If you watch this, that's the stunt woman there, and that's our gal. Kendra actually was interesting because she has what I find to be indecipherable accent. Not indecipherable, like you can understand what she's saying, but I could never tell you where she was from. She worked with a dialogue coach who trained her, and this accent is actually someplace very specific. It's like the second township of the third something of Jamaica, but I didn't know that, so that had to be explained to me. But it's pretty funny because we were constantly sort of like, where are you from? What is this? She tells them in no uncertain terms that the sun is going to rise. We get away with a lot in the sun area. In this particular episode, it's a lethal threat. On the series Angel, he actually has an apartment with Western exposure for some reason, at least for the first year of Angel. We've rectified that in the second season of Angel. So he seemed to be standing near a lot of very sunny windows for my taste. We are aware of that. Fans, we're working on it. It'll be a lot better now, I promise you. But back in those days, sun was really a bad thing for Angel, so this was putting him in pretty dire straits. And this is also, one of our favorite dilemmas, which you may have noticed also, which is to put Buffy's boyfriend in peril, because nobody messes with Buffy's man. And in fact, I think this may even be the episode where she says, nobody messes with my boyfriend. One of the challenges of writing a show like Buffy is that the stakes have to be pretty high on a pretty regular basis for it to be interesting, but pretty much everybody knows not killing Buffy. It's called Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So we have to work pretty hard to keep the suspense. And as such, sometimes we have to throw some surprises in the mix, such as Jenny Calendar actually getting killed. You know, things like that, where people who you think are here to stay are not necessarily here to stay. But unfortunately, that is something we can't do with Buffy, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. So we're constantly trying to find ways to put the people that she cares about in jeopardy.
I have frog fear. I'm sorry. I'm calm down.
Oh, please. You've gone quite beyond the call of duty. But fortunately, I think I may have found something finally.
You did?
I found a description of the missing Dulac manuscript. It's a ritual, Willow. Now, I haven't managed to decipher the exact details, but I believe the purpose is to restore a weak and sick vampire back to full health.
A vampire like Drusilla?
Exactly.
Here's Mr. Spike. This was a great set. This is an incredible set. I don't know if people ever really got the full scope. It was huge, and it's the inside of a meatpacking factory. And we always had big grand plans to, you know, put people on hooks and roll them down meatpacking grates and pack them up like meat, and it never happened. If you ever really noticed, it was very cool. There was a lot of cool stuff.
I can't even believe you. You dragged me out of bed for a ride? What am I, mass transportation?
That's what a lot of the guys say, but it's just locker room talk. I wouldn't pay any mind.
Oh, great. So now I'm your taxi and your punching bag.
I like to think of you more as my witless foil, but have it your way. Buffy!
Here is Buffy's house. They're looking for the Buster, and again, they're now in Torrance. And I think that this may have been one of the first times that I got to go on location, which is pretty cool. One of the things that's cool about location is all the snacks they have here, they take them with you on location. So you still get to eat all the good snacks. One of the little-known Hollywood facts is that they feed us all the time. So you'll be glad to know that when we go to Torrance, we still have our gummy bears and pretzels. Otherwise, you know, we just couldn't create for you people. It just could never happen. This, in fact, is not a set. This is just a continuing shot from the inside of the actual house. And if you notice, it's a pretty remarkable match to the actual sets we have for the show.
Good day.
And of course, this is the meeting of Mr. Bug. Prisma, none too happy to be working with the bugs, I might mention. Kind of bumming about the whole, by the way, you're going to be covered in bugs. But she's an artist. She knew what she had to do for her craft. And now we are back to Angel with the whole sunlight issue. Oh, and this is one of my favorite things. Notice the lock on this skate. We were really ticked off when we saw that. Because basically, like, 1 week Angel can move mountains, and the next week he can't break, like, a bicycle lock. But maybe his strength varies from show to show. I'm sure that's what it is. It's not our incompetence. It's the fact that he has varying levels of strength. And here's obviously the confrontation of Buffy and Kendra. And this was really fun because I got to write my first chick fight ever. And having been a big fan of Dynasty when I was a kid, I knew how these things went. There has to be the pulling of hair, there has to be the scratching with your fingernails, there has to be a lot of slapping and calling of each other bitch and stuff like that. So in fact, rather than sort of go for just that, we sort of made fun of it. And there's some commentary about chick fighting and using the sort of, you know, lame cliches of chick fighting. But all things considered, this is a pretty good fight. They did a pretty good job of actually kicking a little butt, because, you know, that's one of the things about Buffy. She kicked good butt. And this is the moment, of course, when she realizes that Kendra thinks she's a Slayer, and at this point she thinks she's just crazy, but stay tuned.
Who are you?
Who am I? You attacked me. Who the hell are you?
I'm Kendra, the Vampire Slayer.
Arg.